So we hear two concepts in our gospel today that we need to talk about. One is faith and the other is freedom. And of course, it's very appropriate on this 4th of July weekend that we would have freedom mentioned in our gospel. I can think of two stories, though, and I really want to go to faith first. I really want to talk about that first. I can think of two stories that come to mind immediately for me when it comes to faith. One I've shared before. One of my favorite movies is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And in that movie, he undergoes 3 trials in order to get to the Holy Grail. And the third one of those trials, he comes to a gorge with seemingly no way across. But there is a bridge there that he just can't see. The only way for him to find that bridge, though, is to make a leap of faith. So that's one good example of faith. He takes that step even though he is blind to the bridge. Another one is a story that is a personal story of mine from when I was in college, from my semester abroad traveling in Europe. And in that semester, my sister and I actually were traveling together, and we stayed at the end of the semester a week longer than everyone else because we wanted to go to Lourdes, where the Blessed Mother had appeared to Saint Bernadette. And I don't know if Europe operates the same way now as it did back then, but we were well aware that you had to make your sleeping arrangements in the morning or early afternoon in order to have a place to sleep, or else you were going to be in the train station. Now, I don't remember exactly what happened that week when we were traveling, but something messed up the train schedule, and we got there at a different time than we had planned. So we didn't arrive until 8 o'clock in the evening. And so we kind of knew we were in trouble as we were on the train, and we were praying, Lord, please help us. Please provide a place for us to stay. And I have to point out that this was the year 1999 BC, before cell phones. So we had no way of making arrangements on the train, and as soon as we arrived, we got to the train station, and of course it was empty. There was nobody there because the people of Europe, they're all in their homes at 8 o'clock at night. And so I went right to the payphone, because again, I didn't have a cell phone, and I started calling all these hotels and places, and of course there's no room at the inn. You know, everything's all booked up. And we kind of expected that. Well, I turn around from the payphone, and there's this guy standing behind me. He came out of nowhere. I don't know where he came from. And he says, do you need a place to stay? And I just felt in my heart that God had provided for us. This man was like a guardian angel that had taken care of us. And I had that faith that God was going to provide us with something, and sure enough. Now, to this day, I don't remember anything about the bed and breakfast. I just remember that he was there and gave us a place to stay. So I knew, that God had responded to our act of faith. Now, I don't know if any of you picked up on this, but today's gospel could be considered part 2 of 2. And so I want to look back real quick to last Sunday's gospel, because last Sunday's gospel was also about faith. It was part 1, if you will. And in part 1, we saw 2 stories of miraculous healings of Jairus' daughter and a woman who had been hemorrhaging for 12 years. And they were healed because of their tremendous faith. Today, in part 2, we get the other side of the coin. We see how Jesus is doing all these great things in the synagogue, and they reject him. They kick him out and say, get lost. And he's amazed at their lack of faith. And so if we put those two together, we can really learn something from that. Now, I'm a big believer that the gospel, even though it was written 2,000 years ago, we believe that it was inspired by God. So it really applies to us no matter what time period we're living in. God can speak to us through that. And I'm a big believer that every gospel, because of that inspiration, has a challenge for us. And so we need to look at the gospel and say, what is Jesus challenging us to in the gospel today? And I think Jesus is challenging us to look at our own faith. Yesterday, I don't know if you're aware, we celebrated the feast of St. Thomas the Apostle, of course known as Doubting Thomas. And so that's kind of a bonus with these other 2 gospels that we have talking about faith. Thomas had faith, but not until he saw. And so when we talk about this challenge to our faith, I think it's a challenge for each of us, no matter where we are in our faith, because we're all at different places in our faith journey. And so we can't judge each other, but all of us, even if we have a strong faith, are called by the gospel today to reflect how strong is our faith? Are we like the people in the temple, not the temple, the synagogue, who kicked Jesus out? Even though he tried to do all these great things, they heard his wisdom, they saw his mighty deeds, and yet they still rejected him. Are we like St. Thomas, where we want to believe, but we can't until we see it? Or are we like the woman last Sunday who was hemorrhaging for 12 years and said, if I can just touch him, I know I will be healed? That's what we're called to. And it's easy for us, to say, well, I go to church, I'm a person of faith. But we really have to examine our faith, even if we are a person of faith. And we need to look at it and say, which one of those three most closely resembles my faith? Because it's important that we know where we are, so that if we're not at that point of the woman who was hemorrhaging, we can work on that. We can grow in our faith. Jesus said in the Gospels in Luke chapter 18, verse 8, he said, will the Son of Man, when he comes, find faith on earth? So we know this is not just, our times are very troubled, and we know that. But it's not just unique to our times. This was true even back when Jesus was walking the earth. He saw the world around him and said, will I find faith when I come back? And even the Pharisees, who were famous for their lack of faith, Jesus was always pointing it out, even they went to church. In fact, even the people in the gospel today who rejected Jesus, who kicked him out, they were at church when they rejected him. So we know the gospel is challenging us today. It's not enough for us just to go to church. And if we think that, we're fooling ourselves. We need to look at what Jesus wants in our faith when he comes back. And that's the faith that we need to work for. That's the faith that we need to seek out, because we can't just be satisfied with where we are. We are continually growing in our faith. And so that's the challenge of the gospel today. We need to accept that challenge. We need to leave here and really take some time to think about how strong is our faith. Do we believe without exceptions? Do we have faith without conditions? Can we say that we're like that woman who was hemorrhaging for 12 years? If I can just touch him, then I know that God will work. And so today, that's our challenge. Let's go from here and let's really look at that, and let's accept without exceptions. And in doing so, we have faith that God will do mighty things in our lives.